أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I begin as I always begin, in the name of Allah, whose grace I seek in this and all other matters. I want to do a slight step outside of the comfort zone of sticking strictly to Islamic topics relative to the box or boxes into which we sometimes hold Islam, and returning to the entire universe, the mulk, the dominion, as it belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we are currently working our way from Venus, visible in the sky as a night star, to Venus becoming visible in the sky as a morning star. Now, my astrology is such that I have 6 planets that are ruled by Venus, 5 of them in Libra, including my sun sign, the one people most recognize. And the only Earth planet in my chart is Taurus, who is also ruled by Venus. So I have a little bit of a thing for Venus. And I thought, why not share from this location of joy and delight and link it to, as I said, the mulk, to the greater universe. We live in a universe, a solar system, a system that goes around our solar or sun with 9 major planets. Each of those planets are located at a certain distance from the sun and a certain distance from the earth that we are inhabiting. And they each go around the sun in their orbit. As we know from astronomy and studies of outer space, there is a gravitational relationship between these planets and our sun. And there's obviously gravitational pull even in our own planet, our own inhabitation of the earth. So we recognize gravity from our ability to stay on the planet rather than float up into the sky. But the energy of the gravitational pull between the planets keep them in orbit is, the short version of it. There is something that pulls them. Now, if we look at gravitation as a kind of energy, that pull is an energetic pull. When those planets go in those orbits around the sun, they cast a certain kind of relationship to each other. And from the perspective of being on the earth, part of the science of astrology has been to characterize those gravitational energies as having certain potentials and impact based on archetypal characteristics that have been given to the planets. Now, I'm not interested in astrology because I want to be a fortune teller. I'm interested in the elements, the archetypes, and I'm interested in the ways in which they impact each other across the seasons and across time. I'm also interested in how it affects one's personal life, so that will be where people sort of get into astrology. But I'm not interested in the personal life to the exception of the ways in which they're operating out there in the universe. I find that fascinating. And the first time I was interested in astrology was in the 1970s, when the early 1970s, when the technology and the computer graphics were not available to us in order to really get a vision of what was happening. Now they have these amazing graphics and amazing computer programs, and they can actually give you a visual, sort of plot out what's going on in the sky with these planets. And sometimes they do it with actual little spheres that represent the planets, and have them in motion with regard to each other. I'm going to link something below in particular because with respect to the sun, the Earth, and Venus, the Earth is the third planet and Venus is the second planet from the sun. That means that for Venus to go around the sun, it is a smaller elliptical course, circular rotation or whatever. It's smaller than the Earth. The Earth takes 365 and 1/4 days, and Venus takes 224 Earth days to go around the sun. From the perspective of the Earth, it appears that the sun is moving. And in fact, the human languages that I know of, and particularly I've written about this phenomenon with regard to the Quran, the language describes the sun vis-a-vis the perspective of that sun from the Earth. So we say the sun rises and we say the sun sets. But actually, the sun is not moving at all. Thus, from the perspective of Allah, if we take for granted that Allah is the knower and seer of all things, hidden and manifest, and from the perspective of Allah as the author of the Quran, why would the language keep to the misrepresentation of the idea of the sun rising and the sun setting? And again, it's because languages are human-made. Lots can go into that statement, but I'm not going to linger on it. But the necessity of revelation in the language that was clear, Arabiyyun Mubin, the Quran says, in a language that was clear to a Arabic-speaking prophet, upon him be peace, it was necessary to use some of the deficiencies and exuberances in the language in order to give the divine message. You can't just make up new words and say, okay, we need a word that's going to better describe the reality, the haqiqah, from the perspective of Allah. Instead, we will use a language that exists and is well known despite its scientific inaccuracy. I find this point quite fascinating, and not to linger on it long, but there is that book by Maurice Bucaille that says, the Quran and the Bible and science, where he states that some of the early exegetes made statements with regard to phenomena, scientific phenomena, without sufficient scientific knowledge, and as such, their portrayal of the matter was inaccurate, leading people at a certain point to a misconception with regard to the relationship between the Quran and science. People needed more scientific knowledge before they jumped right in and said, this means this. And I found that fascinating because what it did is it gave an evidentiary basis for not getting hoodwinked into things only from interpretation. So, it just lends some credibility to the idea of a dynamic interaction between the interpreter and that which is being interpreted, in this case, the Quran, or the words of Allah. So, on that sidebar, what we observe from the Earth with regard to Venus is quite interesting because she appears in the evening as the brightest thing out there, third only from the sun and the moon. In other words, the sun and the moon are the brightest, but the next brightest star is Venus. But she shifts from being a morning star to being an evening star, or rather, given the fact that she's about to make this shift, from being from being an evening star to being a morning star, because of the relationship of her orbit vis-a-vis the orbit of the planet Earth, and both of those orbits going around the sun. So those three bodies are in an interesting interaction. I'm going to put some links below, either to just photographs or to a short video that I was watching, which if you watch the first 5 minutes of it, you will see, it's sort of exactly, some of my fascination with regard to it. It takes 584 days, a little less than 2 years, for the orbit of the planet Venus to do what she does out in the sky, to make the change from evening star to morning star. And that's coming up in about a month. On June 10th, she will appear as a morning star, and some people say if you catch her when she first appears for the first time, of course she has magical powers. I mean, again, when I say magical powers, there's no power or strength except in Allah. But her appearance the first time brings a light that's been missing for 584 days. That is her first being there in the morning sky, just after Fajr prayer, just before sunrise. She is almost never, there's a few cases literally in history where she's been claimed to have been visible in the daytime, but she's almost never visible in the daytime. It's only at night, just at the time of sunset, or in the morning, just before sunrise. She's amazing to see, so you kind of want to put yourself there where you can see her if you can, and benefit from that first light. Morning has broken, like the first morning. Because of the relationship of Venus to my own personal chart, I'm, as I said, I'm fascinated with her, but also in the period where she ceases to be the night star, the evening star, to before she appears on the other side as the morning star, she has this thing called Cazimi. In other words, we don't see her at all because she's so close to the sun that we can't see her, not even at night. It's like the idea of the occultation of the Imam in Shia theology. There is a light, she's still there, but she has, for all intent and purposes, disappeared. She is not available for us to see because she is so close to the sun that she is eclipsed. And so we are about to enter into the eclipse of Venus. And again, with so many planets in my chart, that are ruled by Venus, I'm kind of feeling it. I'm feeling a lot of stuff because, that's what your inhabitants on the earth in a body is all about. But I was, I think, motivated to share a few things about Venus as this transition goes on, and also because what a week I've had. I think reflecting on my still trying to be a good little Venus type person and agreeing to do an interview with somebody that it was clear that I was not going to be in a very good place with, but also hoping to, as the Quran says, vie with each other for good, hoping to even challenge myself outside of my safety zone to venture out into this, kind of location, because there are way more people in the world, or who could possibly be, listening into a program like this than just this idiot guy. So I said, okay, I know my area well enough that I can do a 1 hour interview. As you see, it turned out to be more than that. I should be able to talk about the things that I love and talk about them with the love that I have for them, irrespective of who is organizing the interview. And for those of you who did catch it, I hope that's what you saw. And since I have not been able to review it, despite the fact that I was promised that, and as a presenter, you would think I should at least be honored in that regard, I can't check back. But I think I did a pretty good job of staying Venus-like on top of being realistically really very pissed off. So now that Venus is getting ready to disappear for a little while before she reappears on June 10th as the morning star, I feel the need today to take more time just for meditation, not words. So that's what I'm planning to do. So I wanted to do this video and do all the steps that it takes to get it out to you, so I can just go in and do several cycles of meditation for the rest of the day. Fortunately, I made enough food yesterday that I have left over, so I don't need to cook tomorrow. When time comes to breakfast, all I need to do is to heat up some things I already have. So I can afford the luxury of it. And also today is one of the days of the week that the maid does not come, so I will be undisturbed. But because I promised to post every day, and I have done that, in fact 2 and 3 times a day, you will notice, I noticed personally that I had not generated any new material in terms of video making during the time that I was dealing with the commitment I'd made to do this other program. So I thought I would just share some of my thoughts about Venus. Now, I hope you at least take a minute to look at some of the links that I will post below this video. Some of the photos that I'm just going to be, sharing them from online, because when she makes her path, she creates an image, inside, of a circle. Remember, I'm like all into circles because think about God as a circle. She creates an image which has a 5 pointed star as part of the path, if you plot it, or a pentagon if you plot it. But actually, because it's in loop-de-loops and circles, it's really cute. It's just really, more beautiful than just thinking about the star or the pentagon. But those are the points. And because the properties of Venus, as we know, are love, and yet she's a real planet. She's a real body out in the sphere. In 2012, Venus passed in front of the sun, and it was a big thing. And I was living in Oakland, and they have a huge science museum and center and observatory, Chabot. And we went there because we were living fairly close to that, part of Oakland. Even if we weren't living that close, we would have gone. I don't know why I said that. Anyway, I used to go up into that area because it's in the middle of a huge natural reserve, so it's also just beautiful for other reasons. But they set up, I think they said they had something like 35 telescopes, including like the big ones, But you can't look at the sun with your eyes. You have to have those special glasses. And when we arrived at Cherbourg, tried to find some parking with all the busyness that was going on, we didn't have any glasses. So we had to wait to purchase them, when we got inside. And as we were standing in the line, because it was crowded, as we were standing in the line, somebody came along and actually gave us some or sold us some. I don't remember. These are glasses made out of paper, except for the part that goes, for when you're looking at the eclipse and stuff like that. And when I took the glasses, because I had, and I'm still fascinated with the experience of the moon passing in front of the sun and what that looks like. And when the moon passes in front of the sun, there are two things, and they have a name, and one is called total, and the other is called annular. The total is that the moon is close enough to the earth that she is big enough such that her passing in front of the sun will cancel out all the sunlight for a period of about 3 minutes. They never last much longer than that, and they never last much shorter than that. And if you are at the right place, because there's a course where that vision is going to be 100%, everybody else is relative to other factors. And so I've made my way twice to kind of catch these events. So if you're in the path of the eclipse, day will turn into night. The birds will stop singing. There's a suspension of, it's just marvelous. Meanwhile, the sun is still there and it's still sending its light, which is why they tell you don't look at it with your eyes. Because although, again, about perspective and appearances, although you can't see the sun can see you, and your eyes will know the difference. So, they say don't look at it. But it's amazing to be in a place where, it turns into, total darkness. And then just a little peak comes back out. And then the brightness of the sun is so much so that, it's like day again, even if there's just a little bit of sun. Well, the annular eclipse was last year, December, and Indonesia was on the path. So we went to the island of Sumatra where it was, exact. I went with a friend, so we're now called the Eclipse group on the WhatsApp. And what happens is that the moon is in her path around the sun. She is, in her path around the earth. She is further away from the earth than for the total. And so what happens is you get this ring of fire. So when she passes exactly in front of the sun is still visible, and daylight looks the same as far as from the outside. So if you're not watching for her, you won't see it. So the tears that go with this group have to do with two pictures that were made by one of the friends on our group that went to witness this, sort of at the exact spot in another island. And that ring of fire is a real photograph, not from my camera, but from a friend who was on this trip. And that's what you see when the distance of the moon from the earth is such that she cannot cover the entire sun when she does her eclipse. So that's what I was expecting when I got my glasses and I looked up in the sky. And instead, I see this little tiny, perfectly circular dot passing in front of the sun. And for a moment, I had a real perception of the distance between the planets. We know that, or we don't think about it at all. But because the ways in which I was alerted to it has to do with images of the eclipse relative to the moon's being very close to the earth, that it was just unexpected. And for some reason, I found it all the more fascinating and endearing, because for a minute I had an actual visual affirmation of the distance of space. So, anyway, these are just random thoughts that I wanted to share about the moon and the stars and the ways in which they bring me so much delight to understand. And when I started listening to the astrology again about a year or so ago, that's really when I discovered YouTube, because I mean, I might have random seen a few things, but I never really followed. But now I'm like, I always have a window open on YouTube, you know? And I love listening to the different ways in which people express the effects of these gravitational pulls and energetic exchanges between these bodies that go around the earth. But one of the things that was happening around the time I started listening is that people were doing predictions with regard to what was going to be happening now. They said there are going to be these planetary alignments, conjunctions, and squares, and the like in 2020. And they are going to change the world as we know it, especially in terms of governments and economy. And I was like, yeah, sure. Sounds a little bit apocalyptic to me. But my way of interpreting it was more at the psychological, spiritual, personal level. And that was, as these planets do their energetic exchange with each other and come into configurations, some of which we have not seen for, hundreds of years, for example, this thing with Pluto and Saturn and stuff. As they go through it, it means that we need to increase our deep awareness, our sort of spiritual and earthly based human consciousness. So I considered that the predictions as still necessary for me to understand, in order that I don't resist them, but instead in order that I work with the energy in order to achieve the greatest results as a consequence of their passing in our universe, in our solar system. So that's always how that's always how I try to figure these things out. Well, turns out it was more literal than I realized. Nobody predicted. One or two of the guys basically come back and say, I said the word virus, or I said the word pandemic, or I said the word, something, that's fine. But the thing is that most of them say now that I didn't see it was going to be necessarily a virus or a pandemic, but I definitely saw that something was going to really turn things upside down globally. And so I was in anticipation when these things happened. And of course, that doesn't mean that I was ready and that I knew how to deal with being on lockdown. And for me now, I think I'm coming up to 7 weeks. No, wait, I passed 7 weeks. I passed 2 months. So it would be 11 weeks of total isolation. I live alone. And I've had to do a lot of work on my soul. And then Ramadan came, so I was ready to keep working on my soul, because Allah gives us this opportunity at least once a year to do what we should be doing all the time, which is to stay aware, to stay connected, to stay in remembrance. But the course of the last week, things kind of fell apart for me in terms of my worship. I was just barely getting in there for extra meditations, and the Quran reading kind of like fell off and everything, because, as I said, the second 10 days are the hardest. You've lost the fascination of beginning, and you're not yet into the anticipation of the end. So I fell into that as well. And now I see that with the occultation of Venus, with her about to go invisible, you can't see it unless you have a telescope and you're out there, at night. And apparently you cannot see her even with a telescope. I don't know. I've never done that with a telescope. But because that's about to happen, and because she's so powerful in my chart, I decided that I would take this day, which is the Mother's Day for the rest of the world, and just go because I'm ahead of the US, they're still in Saturday, right? So of course nobody called me up and say Happy Mother's Day or, sent me a message or anything. Nothing, right? So I'm invisible. So I thought, wow, if I'm invisible, must be something I'm supposed to see from the darkness. And I thought I need to do more meditation, which is the best route that I know of engaging with surrender the reality of the temporariness of my very human existence. So I will see you guys on the other side. Meanwhile, do at least check the pictures out or click the link below. You only have to watch the first 5 minutes to see this thing in animation. The path is just so fascinating. All right.